Today, A Nightmare on Elm Street, The Dream Dealers. Chapter 9. Devin Carmack picked a table near one of the school library's windows, squinting out into an afternoon suffused with golden light, while he waited for the others to arrive. Grace, Milton, Emma, Kent, and his unfortunate choice of girlfriend, Autumn. They had agreed to sit down together today after the last class and compare notes on their first few days of trying out Alex's Nightmare program samples. Mostly it was just an excuse for some teenage socializing, but Devin was curious to see if anyone besides himself was having some serious nightmares without the help of their TranceBox. Devin couldn't stay very long before heading home. That evening, he and Alex were supposed to go out to dinner with their parents, since they'd be departing on their trip to Europe the following day. Rome, Florence, Venice. Rome? Devin thought. He wondered if they'd visit, in reality, the Colosseum that he had been visiting in TranceBox-induced fantasies. He felt a shiver, even in this warm bath of sunlight, at the memory of that dream arena. Tricia would be joining them at the Italian restaurant that they had chosen in honor of their trip. But to Devin's disappointment, Grace couldn't attend. Her father had told her he thought she was spending too many evenings out, and had insisted she spend the night in her own home, having dinner with him instead. Devin thought this was a bit extreme. Grace was hardly out with him every night, and never very late. She went to Emma's house several evenings a week in addition to seeing Devin, but Devin felt Emma wasn't the problem, since Grace's father had told her it was okay to have Emma over for dinner tonight, had even insisted on it. Devin was a bit concerned. He hoped this wasn't the start of a conflict with an overprotective parent. Maybe after having lost his wife, his daughter filled some of that empty space for him. If Devin was right, that neediness could put some unfair psychological weight on Grace's back. But he knew he shouldn't judge the man, as at this point he had only met him briefly on 2 occasions. If Grace's father seemed a bit too clingy, Devin occasionally wondered if his own parents had become a little too removed. Francis and Melinda Carmack traveled a lot, and when Devin and Alex had been younger, they had usually gone along with their parents on their excursions. Repeated trips to the Disney theme parks on either coast, camping outside Maine's gorgeous Acadia National Park, even a trip to Seoul, South Korea, when their dad had had some business over there. But in more recent years, since Devin had entered his teens, they had been inclined to leave Devin in Alex's care, obviously figuring that the brothers were old enough to fend for themselves. Apparently they preferred their own company these days, enjoying a restored sense of freedom from their dependent children. During one of his parents' vacations, a cruise that time, Devin had become self-conscious about Alex having to essentially babysit him, and had asked him if he felt this arrangement was neglectful on their parents' part, and mainly if he felt it was unfair to be saddled with his kid brother. "Hey man, don't worry," Alex had reassured him. "I've never minded it, trust me. And anyway, if this has made Fran and Lindy a closer couple, then I'm all for it. Look around. We're lucky they aren't divorced like everybody else's parents are." He had patted Devin's shoulder then and grinned. "You can pay me back someday by babysitting our screaming quadruplets while Tricia and I spend a month in India, okay?" Devin watched a squad of cheerleaders flounce by as they headed for practice, their hair awash in the gilded light, their short skirts white and radiant like the petals of flowers above the long stems of their smooth, delectable legs. He was hypnotized by the parade of young flesh, but then he felt guilty, knowing Grace would be marching her own lovely legs toward the library any minute now. Bad karma might make him lose her, and he still couldn't believe that he had her. Those remarkable eyes, doe-like and dreamy under long, straight brows. Those succulent lips that had both a little girl quality and a sensuous allure at once. He ached to press his own lips to them. Did she find him weak, wimpy, for not already having done so? The most he had ventured thus far was a quick peck on her pretty cheekbone. Last night, when they'd parted after going out for burgers. It wasn't that he was terribly old-fashioned in his morals. His head swam with countless erotic scenarios, but just as he hated discussing that he still didn't have his driver's license, Devin was afraid to admit to others that he hadn't yet been to bed with a girl. 18 years old, a man by legal definition. And yet he was surrounded every day at school by 16-year-olds more worldly than himself. He'd had the impression when Autumn had pursued him that he could have lost his virginity pretty quickly to her, and that fact alone had tempted his more animal nature, but good sense had prevailed. He wondered if Grace had figured out the embarrassing truth about him, and naturally, he couldn't help but wonder about her own romantic history as well. His belief was that Grace was also inexperienced in this way. He hoped so, not just out of jealousy, but so that she would relate to him, wouldn't judge him as being immature or overly meek. Well, if she was disappointed with him, he certainly hadn't sensed it. Last night at the burger place, they had done their best not to drop gobs of food in their laps, since much of the time they had both been handicapped by using only one hand to eat. Grace had seemed unwilling to let go of his other hand, clenched beneath the table. No, he mustn't let his insecurities blind him to the fact that the girl really did seem enthusiastic about him. It was just that the thought of blowing it and losing her could drive him nuts if he let it. He couldn't wait for her to arrive. He wondered if he'd have the guts to hold her hand again, right here in the middle of the library for all the world to see. Her absence tonight at dinner would make him feel desolate, especially when he saw Tricia beside Alex. But there he was, getting negative again. Devin made himself smile. What was there to be so grim about all the time? He was a very lucky man. Life was good. Grace was a dream come true. Psychology was Milton's last class of the day, and he lingered after the bell so he could talk to Liz Trice alone. He was restless because he had promised to meet Devin and the others in the library, but Liz was still finishing up with another student. She kept throwing him little smiles across the room when the other student wasn't looking. Milton tried not to appear edgy and smiled back. He cracked open the novel he'd been carrying along with the school books today. It was The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath by H.P. Lovecraft. Yes, the TranceBox could offer an amazing experience, but to Milton, nothing beat immersing himself in a book. He'd become enthralled with Lovecraft's fantastical dreamlands. The Vale of Nath, the Peaks of Thok, the Vaults of Then, the Tower of Koth, and the city of the terrifying Gugs, a race feared even by the dog-like ghouls who feasted on the corpses of humans in the waking world. At last, the other student got up to leave. As she walked past Milton, he had the impression she gave him a knowing look. It embarrassed him. How truly secret was his and Liz's little secret. Milton often felt that he was more concerned about their being found out than she was, even though, with a husband and a professional career, she had much more to lose. Liz came walking past the empty desk toward him, blue eyes sparkling and hips sashaying in her tight black skirt as if she was strutting down a modeling runway. When she reached him, she shifted around behind him as slinkily as a feline, leaning her breast against his back to peer at his open book. "How is it, baby?" she cooed. Milton threw a furtive glance toward the open door to her classroom. He saw a few students rush past on their way to go home, but no one looked in, thankfully. "It's great," he replied. He was still shy with her closeness, her contact, even though they had shared much greater closeness and contact than this. "I've definitely got to read more Lovecraft when I'm done." "Maybe he'll stimulate some of your own work," she said. Liz was always encouraging him as a writer. More so, he told her, than even his English teacher, Mrs. Sullivan. Liz was pleased that he would say that. She didn't like the way Mrs. Sullivan gushed about his writing. Let her find her own teacher's pet. Liz had once purposely come into Mrs. Sullivan's room on a day when the English teacher had kept Milton late to talk more about his latest essay. After the icicles Liz's eyes had fired at him over Miss Sullivan's shoulders, Milton had squirmed his way out of any further attempts on Mrs. Sullivan's part to speak to him alone, though he thought Liz was misinterpreting the 50-year-old teacher's interest in him. Looking up at Liz, heady with her generous dose of perfume, Milton went on. "And his dreamland has gotten into my dreams now, or rather, it's gotten into the TranceBox dreams." "And how is that thing going?" "It's weird. In a few minutes, I'm supposed to meet with Devin and the other kids his brother gave discs to so we can discuss our experiences." "Oh," Liz said dejectedly, pouting. "Okay. But I wrote about my latest dream in my journal already. Want to give it a quick look?" He pulled his notebook out of his backpack, opened it, and awoke the device. He deftly called up his writing program, followed by the dream journal Liz had assigned the class. She leaned against his back again to sample the latest entry. It read, in parts, "I screamed, and the scream covered the happy little tinkling sound of the bells over the front door. When I whirled to flee toward the door, flee outside into the blackness of the parking lot, I saw that a man had just entered the convenience store, blocking my way out. And maybe it was the intervening aisles full of bright products that confused my aching eyes, but I still couldn't understand what I was seeing at first, until the terrible reality, this new severely wrong reality, became undeniable. The hideous figure standing in front of the store, staring directly at me, was a man whose bald head was a mass of badly burned and badly healed scar tissue. More horrible than that, however, was the vertical mouth that split his head down the middle from top to bottom, open like a clamshell and full of hooked fangs. His merciless eyes pushed out to either side of his bear trap of bone and flesh. The man wore a ragged, oil-stained green and red striped sweater, dark brown pants, and work boots. The oddest feature of all was that the striped sweater had 4 sleeves, and the man had 2 pairs of arms, one of the being's right hands tipped in long talons that flashed like steel. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Very vivid." "That monster, it's a gug," Milton explained. "And what on earth is a gug?" "They're a kind of monster in Lovecraft's novel, with 4 arms and a vertical mouth. My brain put the gug into a pre-recorded TranceBox dream. Isn't that crazy? This dream belonged to another person's mind, but now it's changing according to things in my mind. It's like this bizarre dream collaboration." "Vertical mouth full of fangs, huh?" Liz grinned. "Sounds like Freud's vagina dentata theory to me." "Vagina what?" "Vagina with teeth, man's fear of emasculation and so forth. But don't worry, mine doesn't have any teeth." Milton's face grew hot. Despite his fears of someone coming in on them and witnessing their coziness, a giddy feverishness got the better of him. He said, "That's good, 'cause I wouldn't want to lose a tongue or anything else important in there." "Well, you haven't lost any of that stuff up here, where I do have teeth." She pointed to her mouth and puckered her lips at him. He knew she would have kissed him next, and that it wouldn't have ended there, had they been at her house just then, as they often were, her husband being a second-shift supervisor for a pharmaceutical manufacturer. Milton glanced at the wall clock and grimaced apologetically. "I really ought to get going." Liz made a childish whining noise and leaned harder against him as if to pin him into his seat with the sheer weight of her passion. She stalled him from leaving by reaching down to play with the notebook, scrolling through the dream journal entry to its end. There she read the final words. "Ah, a fellow predator of the young. I like that about you, Liz. You just need a little attention, don't you? And Milton, you need a little attention, you bad boy. It's a love story for the ages, like Romeo and Juliet. Right, Milton? But then Romeo and Juliet both ended up dead, didn't they? I think I could write a nice ending, just like that one, for your story." "Milton," Liz said, "why did you write this?" He had thought she was only reading the conclusion of the convenience store dream, when he realized there were new lines at the end of that entry, and when he read those lines, his face twisted in confusion. "What the fuck is this? You didn't write this crap?" He could tell Liz was less than amused by being called a predator in need of attention. Icicle eyes as in Mrs. Sullivan's class. No way, I swear I didn't." "Did you leave your backpack unattended long enough for someone to sneak in your notebook and do this?" I guess that could have happened. I don't know when. But really, I swear, I didn't write this stuff. You can see it doesn't fit into my dream at all, Liz. And the person who wrote this, they wrote it to the both of us, see?" "Yeah, I see that. Maybe, I don't know, maybe someone hacked into my computer when I was online. And once they were inside, they snaked into my writing program. Shit, maybe it's Autumn. She's one of the kids Devin's brother gave a disc to. You know her. She's a troublemaker, and I hear she's a big-time computer hacker." "But why would she do that to you unless she had a big crush on you or something?" Liz narrowed her cold eyes. "I don't know. Just that malicious hacker mentality. Look, I'm going to see her in a few minutes with the others. I won't hit her directly with it, but I'll feel her out to see if she gives off a suspicious vibe." Liz nodded, still steaming. "Erase that shit," she said. She watched as Milton highlighted and deleted the mysterious paragraph. So if Milton was to be believed, and she found it unlikely that he was capable of such mean-spirited words, then that meant that someone knew about the two of them, someone who had even threatened them. Could her husband have hacked into the computer somehow, when an internet link had left its door open? But her husband was no hacker, and if he suspected anything, he'd be more likely to come at her face to face, raging at the top of his lungs, as he was inclined to do over far less serious matters than marital infidelity. In fact, she felt her husband was more likely to beat her to death than sneak a cryptic message into a notebook PC journal. Milton muttered what was racing through her thoughts. Somebody knows about us. Somebody suspects, she corrected him. And they can suspect all they want, but no one knows anything. Still, her words rang false to her own ears. They were designed to keep him calm, keep him from bailing out of their relationship, just as she had been afraid of scaring him off with reports of her husband's temper, having told Milton only enough about that to elicit his sympathy and tenderness, but as much as she always downplayed the risk of their relationship, so as to keep him blissfully content, and as much as she buried her own head in the sand, ostrich-like. There were times when the reality of what she was doing sprang out from the foliage and struck her like a booby trap. This was one of those times. She was rigid with anxiety. "I'd better get going," Milton said again, looking grave. "I'll keep an eye on that Autumn." "It'll be okay, baby," Liz told him, forcing a tight smile. "This isn't anything. Just some asshole toying with us. They're jealous, that's all, because what we have is so beautiful." She squeezed his hand. "Right?" He nodded and whispered, "I love you." He looked close to tears at that moment. Surely he knew there was no future for them, and the knowledge of that hopelessness just made his feelings even more poignant and powerful. Doomed love was the most potent brew of love, wasn't it? "I love you, darling." Watching him leave her classroom, Liz almost got dewy-eyed herself. Grace Simmons sat on one of the toilets in the girls' restroom right off the lobby of Springwood High, but not because she had to relieve herself. The relief she sought was a couple of minutes with her eyes closed. As eager as she was to meet Devon in the library, she half wished she could head straight home and take a nap. Under normal circumstances, she didn't sleep well anyways. Those dreams of her mother calling to her from down in the cellar. But now, since she'd begun testing out this program for Devon's brother, things were even worse. Yet, could she blame herself? The dreams on that disc were terrifying. Last night, without even being hooked up to the TranceBox, she had had a nightmare about one of its sequences, imagining herself in an autumnal forest, while black-clad figures with swords, ninjas right out of a martial arts movie, flitted from tree to tree, drawing nearer and nearer, but never coming directly into view. She had been dressed prettily enough as a geisha, but her fan would have made a less than effective weapon had those ninjas ever come out at last from behind the crimson trees. Grace propped her elbows on her knees and cupped her face in her hands. She shut her eyes, listening to other girls as they went in and out of the restroom. Catty gossip and toilets flushing. This wasn't exactly the coziest spot in which to seek a brief refuge, but at least the close metal walls of the toilet stall gave her a boxed-in sense of privacy that was otherwise hard to achieve in this place. Other, more distant sounds, lockers slamming, the cars of those kids that had had them, starting up and driving out of the parking lot. "Grace! Grace!" She jerked her head up, her eyes flicking nervously. No, it wasn't her mother's voice beckoning to her. It was Emma's. Grace was not standing at the top of her basement stairs. She had dozed off for a moment seated on the toilet here in school. God, she hoped she wasn't late for her rendezvous with Devon and the rest in the library. She stood up, straightened her clothes, and pushed open the door of the stall. The restroom was empty of its former traffic, most of the kids having no doubt headed home by now. Wanting to look good for Devon, Grace took a moment to check herself in the mirror. "I'll be right there," she called out to Emma, whom she assumed must be outside the restroom door waiting for her. Wow, when had this happened? A huge crack ran diagonally across one of the large mirrors over the sinks. She swore the girls in this school acted as wild as the boys, but she suspected that was a nationwide phenomenon these days. "Animals," she grumbled, shaking her head. Looking into the mirror made it appear that her head had been split in two, and then the halves slightly misaligned when put back together. In the mirror behind her, Grace saw one of the other stall doors crack open a little. She thought she glimpsed a shadowy face inside, and a glistening eye peeking out at her. Grace turned around to confront her sneaky voyeur, and it had better not have been a boy stealing into the girl's room at the end of the day when he thought he could get away with such a disgusting scheme. She saw the door ajar, but no shadowy face, and when Grace marched to it and flung it open, she found no one inside. Thinking she might have the wrong stall, she opened the doors of those to the immediate left and right. Still, she discovered no lurkers, male or female. She ended up opening the door of each stall in the row. Nothing. She definitely needed to get a good night's sleep. "I'm sorry, Emma," she said loudly, moving to the door to let herself back out into the lobby. When she emerged from the girls' room, 3 facts made Grace freeze in her tracks in utter bewilderment. For one thing, Emma was not waiting outside for her. Well, that could be explained easily enough. Emma had either grown impatient with waiting and irritably left for the library without her, or else she hadn't known Grace was asleep in the stall and had gone to seek her out elsewhere. The other 2 things were harder to take in. For one, she found herself not in the high school's lobby, but in a corridor lined with metal lockers on the right and a series of arched windows set high in the brick wall on the left. For another thing, the sky outside those windows was pitch black. How long had she been asleep in that restroom? If night had fallen, did that mean she was locked in the school? Her father had insisted on her having dinner with him tonight. He'd be upset at her absence, and might think she had defied his wishes and gone to spend the evening with Devon after all. She could have sworn she had gone into a bathroom off the lobby. In fact, she didn't even recognize this particular corridor at all. Grace took a few uncertain steps down the hallway, still attempting to get her bearings. But she only became more disoriented as a harsh sound cut through the stillness. It had sounded like the caw of a crow, coming from the gloomy end of the long, long hallway. Grace craned her neck, as if that might help her see better into the murk, reluctant as she was now to take another step forward. As she stood there, staring down the dark corridor, she began to make out a wavering light. It increased in intensity, becoming distinctly orange. She thought she could even hear the approaching crackle of flames. She could detect a smell, too, an awful burnt smell. Suddenly there was an explosion of movement and fire. Grace's eyes widened in disbelief as a flock of crows began pouring down the hallway toward her like a train rushing through a tunnel. What made it all the more shocking was that the crows appeared to be on fire, cawing and squawking in agony, some of them crashing into the lockers on one side and the windows on the other, then dropping to the floor unconscious, or dead, the flames enveloping their oily black bodies. All Grace could do, in her horror, was spin around so that her back was to them, tuck in her head with her arms folded across the top of it, and brace herself. A second later they were all around her. Worse, they were crashing into her, buffeting her like a hurricane wind, their beaks tearing her clothing and gouging her flesh. She dropped to her knees with a cry, then coiled herself into as small a ball as she could manage. But still they pummeled her. Any moment and their flaming bodies would catch her on fire as well. "Get up!" a familiar voice, a hand taking her hand to help lift her out of her hunched position. "Get up, lazy ass!" Grace stood, lifted her head, and blinked up into the eyes of Emma, who grinned at her with amusement. "Oh, God," Grace croaked. "I recognized your shoes under the door," Emma explained. "Did you finish your business yet?" She gestured at the toilet she had lifted Grace from. Grace glanced back at it numbly. Yeah. What time is it? Is it nighttime?" "Girl, wake up!" Emma patted her cheek. "We'd better go meet your boy now before he wonders where we are." Grace looked past Emma at the mirrors over the sinks. No diagonal crack and no tatters in her clothing or gouges from bird beaks in her skin. She heaved a heavy sigh. She didn't know what was worse, some of these new nightmares she was suffering, or the one where her mother came to visit her again and again, as if to impart some important knowledge to her. Kent Lowe found Autumn waiting for him in front of her locker, sitting on the floor with her back resting against it, her notebook open on her crossed legs. She didn't seem to notice the kids inconvenienced by her presence as they had to step around her in the hallway, or lean across her to remove or replace books in their own lockers. Kent gave her a playful little kick in the sneaker with his own sneaker, and she grumbled. "Like easy ass liquor? I wish." "You probably do, you pig." She grinned up at him. "Working on a new project for my site, and it's coming along great." "Yeah? What is it?" "A free download." "Yeah, I could figure that much." Autumn's website was titled Fall Leaves, the Free Download Lady. Fall Leaves was her online presence, not so subtly based on her actual name. But of course she couldn't use her actual name since her website offered free downloads of illegally copied software. "What is it this time?" Autumn shut the cover of her state-of-the-art notebook, like all her cutting-edge gear made possible by her surgeon father's impressive salary. After she'd slipped it into her backpack, Kent held out a hand to help her to her feet. "Well," she said, "it's the disc Alex gave us, the Nightmare Program." Kent just blinked down at his diminutive girlfriend, then managed, "What? The disc we're testing for Devon's brother? You're copying that onto your free download site?" "Like, yeah, it's going to be amazing. This is the first CIT program I've tried putting up here. But I know it will work. All the people who want to download it, all they have to do is write the file to a blank TranceBox disk, and voila! Stick on your patch and get ready for some nasty dreams." "Autumn, look, you can't do that." Her grin evaporated. "Like, why can't I do that, Kent?" Because this is Devon's brother we're talking about here, not some company you have no connection to. Alex would go through the roof if he found out you were pirating his work as a free download, taking money out of his pocket. That's just it, Kent. Guys like him are taking money out of our pockets all the time. These corporate assholes, these money-sucking big businesses. He told you his design company is just starting out. They're not some big corporation. But he has the same mentality. Like, that's where him and his company want to be and where they're going. By walking up a mountain of teenage allowance money to get there. You heard Alex's bullshit. He's got that greed in his eyes, all the hype and slimy smooth talk. Autumn, it's illegal. Okay, your site was always illegal, but you've protected yourself with all kinds of shields and fake names and addresses. All this hacker armor. If you do this, though, and he discovers it, well, that crime is too close to home. You'll get busted, and then you'll be in a whole lot of shit. Lawsuits, maybe even jail. Listen, I'm copying a rough prototype, not a copyrighted finished product. That doesn't mean much. It's still his work, his research. Like, he'll still make his millions. How many people will find out my little guerrilla site? It's the World Wide Web, Autumn. She glared at him with a look of scorn that was on the verge of pure hatred. Who are you really worried about here, Alex Carmack or me? Wilting in the blaze of her eyes, Kent could only squeeze out the last dregs of his strength. I'm worried about my girlfriend, but I'm also worried about my friendship with Devon. Devon. Sometimes I think that little yuppie tadpole is your girlfriend. What have you got against Devon, Autumn? Could her eyes become any more molten? Like, why should I have anything against him? He means nothing to me. And you're starting to mean nothing to me, Kent. Is that what you want, huh? He couldn't help himself from swallowing a lump of saliva. The click of his throat sounded gigantic to him, and he hated himself for letting her hear it, too. "No," he mumbled, shifting his eyes away. He saw a passing student glance at him, embarrassed by their noisy argument. "That isn't what I want." Could have fooled me. From now on, if you don't have anything good to say about my site, then keep your opinions to yourself. Like, you can ask Alex Carmack to design you a virtual girlfriend, if the stuff I do disgusts you so much. I didn't say that. What? I said I didn't say that. Let's just drop it, okay? Come on, she snapped, spinning away from him and moving so fast down the hall that even with his much longer legs he had to jog a little to catch up with her. We're going to be late for our meeting with your girlfriend, Devon. Kent and Autumn were the last to arrive, finding Devon, Grace, Emma, and Milton already seated around two pushed-together library tables. Nice of you guys to join us, Devon said, tapping his watch. That dinner with his folks was coming up fast. Kent winced and sighed, expecting Autumn to bark, but she only smiled sweetly and said, "Sorry, we lovebirds just got so caught up in a romantic interlude." "Oh yeah," Emma laughed. "I wish I'd seen that." "Now don't be a perv, Emma," Autumn said. "Like, you guys can totally start without me. I've got a book to return." She held up the library book in question. Was it a secret joke, Kent wondered, showing Devon a book on website design? She walked briskly toward the counter. Kent immediately leaned toward Devon and whispered, "I need to talk to you tonight. Can you come to my house?" "I'm going out to dinner with my parents." "Shit. When will you be back?" "I don't really know." Devon looked toward Autumn, standing at the counter, then returned his gaze to Kent. It wasn't hard to figure out the source of his friend's unease. "I can come over tomorrow. My folks will be gone on their trip by then. Can it wait?" "Yeah, that'll work. Thanks." Kent sat back in his seat, just a second before Autumn turned from the counter and began striding in their direction. Grace whispered to Devon, "Is everything okay?" "Can you come to Kent's place with me tomorrow after school, or will your dad be pissed?" She squeezed his knee under the table. "Hey, just because he wants me to stay home tonight doesn't mean he's trying to keep you away from me." Are you sure? Are you sure he doesn't, hate me? No, my dad is cool, and even if he did, I'm Daddy's little girl. I get my way. Devin smiled and rested his hand atop hers, keeping it there on his knee. All right, where were we, bitches? Autumn said, noisily scraping at a chair beside Kent and dropping into it. Well, Milton said, while we were waiting for you two, I read these guys something I wrote in one of my dreams. It's part of the journal I'm keeping for psychology class. Actually, it was a TranceBox dream, the convenience store segment. The way I experienced it, my subconscious mind incorporated the monster that I've read about in this novel. He showed them his copy of The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath. Yeah, but it was only partly that novel's monster, Devin noted. It was still at heart the guy with the knife glove, the guy I've seen as a lion in the arena. Me too, Emma said, and cutting himself out of the elephant in the zoo chapter. Yeah, agreed Grace, who then shuddered. Not to mention the guy outside the hospital room's door, Autumn said. And does he talk to you, even use your name, taunt you personally? Yeah, Emma answered. He thinks he's real funny. In the zoo dream, he asked me if being with the animals made me feel close to my African roots. And then there's that Dracula dream, Grace muttered, more to herself than the others. Yeah, fuck. The Dracula one is the worst, Kent said. And every time you use the disc again, it's like the first time. You don't remember being there before, and you don't remember him. He cornered me in the zoo dream and tried to stab me with his claws, Emma said, but they broke and crumbled to pieces when they hit me, like they were just made out of sugar or something. He said he wasn't strong enough to hurt me yet, but he was almost there. So, who is this freak? Autumn asked. Why is he in every dream? I've had him in dreams without the TranceBox now, Milton said. Kent turned to him. You too? Come on, Devin, Autumn said. Tell us the truth. Is this guy... Freddy Krueger, Grace broke in. In one of the dreams, he told me his name is Freddy Krueger. Okay, Autumn resumed. Devin, is this Freddy Krueger some kind of virtual construct your brother inserted into the dream memories, some kind of advanced AI? If he did, he didn't tell me about it. I'm pretty sure Krueger was in all these dreams before my brother even extracted them. Well, did all the dreams come from one person then? Devin didn't want to reveal that the brains had been those of people dead for several decades. That information was still confidential. Not to mention that he didn't want to frighten Grace more than she already was. He only replied, no, it was multiple donors. Okay, so how could that be? Why would different people all dream of the same, very distinct person? No one had an answer ready for that. Kent was rolling Devin's pen back and forth thoughtfully between his hands. What's with the guy with the bomb in the hospital? The terrorist. He makes me as nervous as Krueger does. Why is he in there? It doesn't make any sense. Hello, Autumn said. It's a dream. It doesn't have to make sense. I hate terrorists, Kent said, still absorbed in his pen rolling. Yeah, Autumn said with imitation gravity. Terrorists suck. Kent looked up at her. He'd once had a computer hard drive ruined by a virus he received in an email. The mean-spirited prank of some faceless hacker. He thought of hackers as terrorists, of a kind, but he did not say this to Autumn. Grace cut into the conversation. Devin, when will Alex want our feedback? Autumn smirked. Already anxious to have this over with, Gracie. Aren't you? I think it's fascinating as all hell. What do you think, hubby? She turned to Kent. Fascinating, he echoed hollowly. Devin gave Grace a look both sympathetic and apologetic. Like Alex said, he wants us to try this for a week, maybe two. So we've still got maybe half a week and a half to go. Autumn gave a shrug and said, Well, good night, Gracie. Chapter 10. Devin was due to arrive in an hour, but Kent still wasn't sure whether he'd be able to go through with it or not, whether he could bring himself to tell Devin about Autumn's plan to make his brother's nightmare program available as a free download from her guerrilla website. Autumn was still his girlfriend, and he felt loyalty to her no matter how much he disapproved of the pointless maliciousness that she called rebellion. It was her way of lashing out in anger. Well, better for her to lash out at big business than at him. But when the target was the brother of one of his best buddies, and Kent especially didn't want to see Alex get any more upset than he already was. At school today, Devin had told Kent that one of Alex's friends and co-workers, Patrick Tremblay, had been murdered yesterday by an unknown assailant in his home. Devin was bringing Grace along this afternoon. At first, Kent hadn't been too comfortable with that, but he had come to know Grace lately, and he felt she was cut of the same cloth as Devin, trustworthy, good-hearted. He envied Devin for that. Outside, the late afternoon glowed with the mellow, nostalgic aura, but inside his house, a demon was stalking Kent Lowe. It walked within his shadow, its talons slowly inserting themselves into his back. That demon was alcohol. Not since the summer when his parents had enrolled him in a program to control his drinking had the demon's whisper in his ear been so insistent. Why? Why did it have to come haunting him, today of all days, when he already had so much on his mind? But of course, it was the burden on his mind that had attracted the demon's attention. So it hadn't been fully exorcised after all. It had been lurking, patiently waiting all along. His father had wanted Kent to stop drinking, and so he had made sacrifices of his own, bringing no more beer into the house and emptying out the liquor cabinet. But one afternoon, when mowing the lawn, Kent began searching for a funnel so he could pour more gasoline into the machine, and he had chanced upon the liquor cabinet's former contents stashed away in the garage. Bottles of vodka and scotch, rum and tequila, Greek ouzo and Turkish yeni raki, both tasting of licorice and both strong enough to burn the breath out of your lungs. Yes, the demon pointed its claw's finger toward Kent's bedroom window, down toward the roof of the garage, its lair, the nest where it had been hiding and biding its time. No, Kent whispered aloud, staring at the window. No way. Fuck that. He turned toward his computer desk and spotted his TranceBox resting on the top shelf with stacks of software jewel boxes. Over the summer, when the demon had been steadily clawing at his back, and his parents had been screaming at each other downstairs, like two more demons raging in a hell beneath his feet, this innocuous-looking little machine had been a secret door into blissful escape, a portal to other dimensions, like a rift in time and space. He had been transported into the lives of other people, in a kind of transmigration of souls, a temporary reincarnation. He had been able to forget his own life, to shed it like a snakeskin so as to inhabit another person's flesh. And then there was the more fantastical brand of escapism that the dream programs provided. Dreams like morphine spreading through his mind, bringing him solace, or at least a distraction, so all-consuming that it eclipsed his own identity. Even when the dreams had been frightening, they had been other people's fears that could sweep off his shoulders like dust when he awoke, feeling a brief catharsis, until the TranceBox called to him again. It was calling to him now. Kent glanced at his watch. There was still time to kill before Devin got there. He could program the TranceBox to submerge him in its magic pool for just 30 minutes. He'd resurface, refreshed, and plenty of time to receive his guests. So the question was simply, which of his discs to play? The first choice that occurred to him was a wet dream recording, whereby he could experience a sexual act through the eyes, ears, nose, mouth, hands, and other parts of another person. Once, just out of curiosity, he had tried a recording of a woman's point of view as a man made love to her, but he sure wouldn't want his friends to know that, especially that it had been, weirdly exciting. But he and Devin had discussed other wet dream discs they'd tried and swapped. Devin hadn't admitted to Kent that he was a virgin whose only sexual experiences to date had been virtual ones. But Kent had figured it out for himself, and he didn't want to tease his friend about it. There had been times when Kent would have gladly given Autumn to Devin as a gift he could keep. Devin would have some for real sex, and Kent would have some peace. Thoughts of Autumn got his spirits down again. Damn. For whatever reason, he still loved her. He'd rather be in bed with her right now than reliving someone else's erotic encounter. He decided not to go with the wet dream after all. One jewel box rested by itself next to a high stack. It had a handwritten label, Alex Carmack's Nightmare Program. The one Autumn was probably, at the very moment, working to put onto her website. He could understand her enthusiasm for it, at least. It was a real mindfuck, especially the way he retained his own sense of identity while immersed in its world. He picked up the jewel box, opened it, and contemplated the shiny little chip. Sure, why not a half hour's worth of crazy dreams in which he could totally lose himself? As when watching a horror movie, his fear would make him forget his real-life anxieties for a while. Kent went over to his bed and lay back with the TranceBox in his hands, first inserting the disc and then programming in its commands. Yeah, just a single chapter would be enough thrills for one session. He set the machine beside him on the mattress and stuck the receiver pad to his right temple. He closed his eyes with a smile of nervous anticipation, like a kid waiting for a little train to bring him into the mouth of a carnival haunted house ride. Recorded screams echoed from inside, accompanied by the squeaking and flutter of bats. The double doors were opening inward now. Blackness loomed straight ahead. The train started creeping forward. Screams echoing, the squeaking and flutter of bats. Before he opened his eyes, Kent felt a strong, chilly wind crash against him like an ocean wave, almost knocking him back a step. His lids snapped open. Screams. Screams. Another gust of wind ruffled Kent's hair. It had a fine mist of almost rain mixed into it. Tortured gray bundles of cloud clouded the sky, with only a pale yellowish light breaking through at the horizon. Kent found he was standing on the flat-roofed tower of a fortress or castle. Looking behind him, he saw taller, pointed towers soaring high, stabbing at the bellies of the clouds as if to tear them open and release the rain that they were pregnant with. Screams, an impossible chorus of screams. The throats from which they issued must have been uncountable. Drawn by the screams, Kent walked across the flagstones of the turret's roof and placed his hands on its surrounding parapet. But when he gazed down at the scene spread before him, he wished he had never taken a single step forward. Below lay a gray and desolate plain, with the man-made forest to give the landscape a mocking semblance of fertility. It was a forest of high stakes, socketed into the earth. There must have been thousands of stakes, perhaps 20,000, 30,000. They were arranged in concentric circles, as if in some kind of blasphemous offering to God, since only his eye, looking down from above, could appreciate the care given to the geometric formation. But only the devil would accept an offering this staggering in its evil, because upon each tall stake was impaled a human being. For many, the stake entered through their bottoms and emerged from their mouths. Others were pinned like insect specimens through their chests or bellies. There were men, women, and even babies could be seen skewered on the same stakes as their mothers. "Oh my God," Kent hissed, his fingers hooked on the parapet, as if they might dig right into the stone. "Oh my God!" Many of the impaled were dead, some beginning to rot. Others, so many others, still moaned, wailed, screamed, alive, somehow still alive. It was a mind-blasting choir of the damned, rising up to be carried on the wind in ghostly vocalizations. "The trick," said a strange, distorted voice behind him, "is to oil the end of the stake and not let them be too sharp. Otherwise, see, the impalee might die too quick, and we can't have that. How could we enjoy this music otherwise?" Kent whirled around so fast that he fell back against the parapet. For a split moment, he thought he might flip right over backwards and plummet to his death. A figure dressed all in black spread his arms and smiled. "Listen to them, the children of the night. What sweet music they make." The man wore a long black coat that flapped around him like a cape in the wind, its high collar turned up against his neck. He was monstrously burned, a half-melted effigy of a man, his bald head gleaming in the silvery light. There was a regal quality to him, however, as if he was some dark prince. The man's right hand wore a glove of black leather, and from each of the glove's 4 fingers sprouted an elegant blade of silver engraved with ornate designs. Seeing Kent's eyes on them, he raised one dagger finger into the air. "But this is my preferred method of impalement." "Who are you?" Kent got out in a strangled voice. "I'm so sick of being asked that," the man snarled suddenly, losing his noble demeanor. "You've all forgotten me. That's the whole point." He forced himself to be calm again. "History makes men like Vlad Tepes immortal, and fiction makes men like Count Dracula immortal. But soon, I'll make them both look like amateurs." "Look, I just want to go," Kent said, desperately looking left and right, like a cornered animal, but seeing no way to get down from the turret. There was no trap door in its floor. Tears began to fill his eyes. The screams were like stakes thrust into his ears, into his brain. As if he hadn't heard him, the scarred man went on. "My name is Freddy Krueger,
Remember that name, Kent. Remember me!
I will. Just please don't hurt me. Still ignoring his sobs, Krueger turned to look down at the sea of impaled bodies. He drew in a deep breath of the stench carried by the wind, a miasma of blood and vomit, decay and excrement. He sighed blissfully.
Your girlfriend has my admiration, Kent. I'm glad I haven't killed her. What she's doing with that website of hers will make my world accessible to thousands, millions of people. Once I was limited to one little town, one little street. Now, the whole wide world will be my playground.
I don't understand. Autumn?
And Alex, wanting to mass produce my nightmares. Both of them doing my work and not even knowing it. Even Milton writing his nightmares into that notebook of his, filling it with my essence, opening another door for me so I can reach through into your waking world. The wonders of technology, huh, Kent?
Since I'm Autumn's boyfriend, then you won't want to hurt me, right? Krueger smirked at him over his shoulder.
Maybe I'm jealous. Maybe I want her for myself.
Kent babbled. Okay, sure, she's yours then.
Now that's love for you.
Krueger returned his gaze to the vista of carnage.
These aren't real people now, of course, but they will be. This will be my reality, my crop of souls for the harvesting, my field of screams.
I'm just dreaming all this, right? Krueger abruptly whirled around, his coat floating out from him like immense black wings.
How would you like to be the first real tree in the forest, Kent?
Please, I just want to wake up. Walking toward the cowering teenager, Krueger said,
If a man is impaled in the forest and no one is there to hear his screams, did he really scream?
Kent backed against the opposite parapet, quaking with sobs, too paralyzed to do more than watch Krueger come at him. But at the last moment, Kent did manage to do one thing. He screamed. So your dad doesn't want you to have your own car? Devin asked, sitting in the passenger seat of Emma's borrowed car and looking over at Grace. She sat behind the wheel, a careful novice driver not taking her eyes off the road. No, well, he gets worried about me, but he's not as bad as you seem to think he is. He promised to help me get a car this year so I can have it all ready whenever I start college. I didn't mean to suggest your father is bad, Grace. I like him, I do. She smiled without looking his way. I think he likes you now, too. Yeah, you think so? Of course, relax. On the car radio, turned to a soft rock channel playing mostly romantic oldies, Sadie's song Kiss of Life came on. Devin spoke along to the opening lyrics. There must have been an angel by my side. Something heavenly led me to you. Grace felt a shiver go through her. At this moment, she could believe those words, that their coming together was an act of divine providence, preordained. But the matter at hand returned to her, and she nodded her head toward the windshield. Is this it? Devin glanced outside. Yeah, the gray house, bluish gray. Got it. Grace nosed the car to the curb in front of Kent Lowe's neat-looking two-story house. Just home from work, his parents' 2 cars filled the driveway. And through the parted curtains of a first-floor window, Devin could see the flicker of a TV screen. The window of Kent's second-floor bedroom was blinded by a drawn shade. Devin turned back to face Grace. Neither had opened their door yet. Well, here we are. Yep. Like an angel herself guiding their destinies, Sadie sang, You gave me the kiss of life. Devin leaned toward Grace, and she leaned toward him. The kiss was a little awkward at first, their tongues fumbling over each other tentatively. But once they got their mouths settled the way they liked it, the kiss was long and sweet, passionate but not frantic. Devin had slipped his right arm around Grace's waist, and she placed one hand on the back of his head. The song was their soundtrack, and Grace thought that whenever she heard it in the future, it would always pull this memory vivid and glittering out of her brain. Toward the end of their first kiss, Grace sucked on Devin's full lips, first the bottom, then the top, as she had fantasized about doing more than once. He was beginning to do the same to her lower lip when a car passed in the street close to their own, breaking the spell. Shyly, they unlocked their mouths and extricated their arms from each other. though they switched to holding hands. "That was nice," Grace said. "Very nice," Devin sighed. "I think we should go inside, though, huh? Kent's waiting, and I'm afraid his folks will look out the window and see us." "Yeah, let's go," Devin said, but he leaned toward her again for another quick taste of her lips before he cracked the passenger's door open. They walked to the front door, still holding hands. Kent's mother answered the door for them, looking a bit frazzled and impatient. "You can go on up," she told the teenagers as she hurried back in the direction of the kitchen. They heard her shout toward the living room. "Thanks for answering the door for me. I'm making supper, you know." "I'm watching something," they heard Kent's father shout back from the living room. "I hope that's not us in a few years," Devin whispered, leading Grace to the carpeted steps to the second floor. "I promise not to be like that, if you promise." Devin took hold of the handrail. He grinned foolishly, still intoxicated by what had occurred. "Promise." From the second floor came a heart-stopping scream. Grace seized Devin's arm, and he called up to the stairwell. "Kent!" He started taking the steps, 2 at a time, leaving Grace to follow at her own pace. The scream trailed off into a loud, wet gurgling just as Devin threw open Kent's door to see. Kent hung in the air, as if invisible wires tethered him to the ceiling. His arms had flopped loosely to his sides, his legs pedaling slowly, his eyes wide and glazed with shock. He was still gargling the blood in his throat, still alive for a few moments more, as he floated down through the air. He resembled a man thrown off the side of a ship, drowning as he sank toward the ocean's bottom. It would be more accurate to say he resembled a man skewered on a stake, sliding down its shaft from the weight of his body and the lubrication of his blood, for there was a hole in his chest just below his sternum. Blood ran from it in all directions, beginning to rain from his hovering body to the floor. There was a corresponding hole from which more blood dripped abundantly in his back. "Oh, shit! Oh, shit!" Devin cried out, backing into Grace as she appeared in the doorway behind him. She clutched his arms, and now it was her turn to scream as they watched Kent's body continue to lower toward the floor. At last it settled there, his arms giving one spasmodic convulsion, and his gurgle fading away into his chest. "Kent!" They heard his father yelling, pounding up the stairs. He pushed in past them roughly, and when he saw his 17-year-old son lying on the carpet, the wound in his chest gaping as if something held it open for a few seconds more, he bellowed, "Kent! Kent! Oh, God!" "Devin," Grace sobbed, falling against his chest and tucking her face into his neck. "Who did this?" Kent's father whirled at them, his bulging eyes crazed. Devin almost expected to be attacked by him, as though the man believed they were the ones responsible. I don't know." Devin's voice creaked, small and sickly. But he thought he did know, one contributing factor involved in his friend's death, because he had seen the white patch on Kent's right temple, the receiver pad of his TranceBox. Okay, this has been chapters 9 and 10 of A Nightmare on Elm Street, The Dream Dealers. I gotta say, I'm loving this book. This is the second time I've read it in my life. The first time was back in 2006. And now I'm remembering why I liked it so much. It's been long enough that it's still new to me, though. Part of me wishes that I could just finish this book over the next few days and then get back to Jason X, Planet of the Beast. But I don't want to make anybody mad. I said I would do 2 books at a time, alternating days, so I'll stick to that if that's what y'all want me to do. But this has definitely left me wanting more, and I am definitely looking forward to Monday whenever I do the next 40 pages or so of this book. Hope everybody else is enjoying it as much as me. I look forward to the rest, and I hope you do too. Please be sure to subscribe if you haven't done so already. Click that like button, click the bell so you always know when new chapters are dropping. And until next time, this has been your 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening, and pleasant dreams!
Never sleep again.